fact, you're going to deal with this $1.6 trillion deficit in a fiscally responsible manner.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to start, as has every other member of this panel, by thanking you for your service to the country in previous administrations and in the Senate, and for your willingness to take on this thankless task, but one that, as you said at the outset, you took on for your grandchildren, for your communities, for our country. I think all of us agree that we are in a debt and deficit crisis, and one that I would welcome your elucidating a little bit further just what the consequences would be for, as you put it, Senator, the little guy, because I'm convinced that if we do not tackle this in the next 2 years, the consequences for the American economy, for our competitiveness, for our long-term future are drastic. I want to commend you for tackling 6 different significant areas and for your core principles with which I agree. And in tax code reform is the piece that I'm going to focus on and I'm interested in. It is my hope that part of your assumption is that if we made these significant changes, the zero-based budgeting approach to sort of scraping clean all the tax expenditures, lower the rates, that there would be greater growth and some possibility of higher receipts than the 18.8% referenced by Senator Johnson. Please tell me, if you would, 3 things. First, give us a picture in a little more detail about how it might unfold if we fail to take these steps. How would it unwind that rates would go through the roof and the consequences for the average folks of America would be felt? And how do we stay on top of a sense of when that's going to happen? Because my sense is it may happen very suddenly and without a great deal of warning. First. Second, we talked earlier about the need for a long-term mechanism to restrict not just growth in spending, but to also prevent the reemergence of a lot of tax expenditures. Doing all the hard work of fixing the tax code, some mechanism that would prevent it from then being undone. Any suggestions in that field would be welcome. And then last, if we've got a minute or 2 left, something about the health reform ideas. You've got a significant amount of cuts here, more than $430 billion, that haven't been touched on in the 2 previous senators who've asked specifically about the health portion of it, if you would.
Well, Senator, let me just address the tipping point, because that was your colleague, our colleague, I think of him as a colleague, he was of ours in the commission, Senator Durbin, kept asking, where is the tipping point? And we kept saying, we don't know. But some say 2 years, some say 3. I happen to say it all depends on how far the Congress goes in getting to the meat of reducing a 14 trillion, which will be 300 billion, 14 trillion, $300 billion debt, and a deficit of 1 trillion, 6 or 700 billion. It depends on that, because the people who hold our paper are not going to be patient, and they're going to say, you didn't have the guts to do anything, you romanced the stone again, you didn't do what you're supposed to do, and we want some money for our paper. And it is my experience that big guys take care of themselves, and they will take care of themselves. That's how we got in this huge slosh of recession. The fat cats took care of themselves, and the little guy will get stung. That's all I know, and that's what I keep talking about. Doesn't make any sense to anybody when you talk about getting the paper for the money, but that's what it is. The bondholders are not just gentle people.
And what kind
he
of
can handle the tough question.
What kind of mechanism might we put in place to keep tax expenditures from ballooning once again?
Yeah, we did a couple of things. We put a fail-safe in there on the tax side that said if Congress doesn't act by 2012, then you have an automatic across-the-board reduction in tax expenditures. And I think that would get you to move. We also had another fail-safe in there that if the deficit to GDP was greater than what's called primary balance, which is 3%, that the President had to submit a proposal to get it to 3%. This was by 2015. That was his date he picked, so that's why we went with that. And or if the debt became unstabilized after that, it began to grow again, then we would, the President would have to act. On health care cuts, we have in our plan, we didn't just willy-nilly say that there ought to be cuts in health care. We have every single cut absolutely spelled out for and paid for. Again, I had to gore my own ox to do this. I did cut the funds that go to hospital for medical education. But again, I thought it was one of the areas we could. We took away some of the trickery and gaming that goes on in Medicaid. One of the things you can see that some of the states do is they will raise the cost of the tax that they have on providers, and then the providers will then be allowed by the state to raise their fees. And so it's kind of a wash for the provider. But oh, by the way, when the providers can raise their fees, then the feds have to match it, taxpayers, 2-to-1. And it ends up costing us over that same time period about $44 billion. We cut out that kind of gaming.
Well, I see I'm over my time. I just want to close by thanking you again for your very hard work, and I'm hopeful with the leadership of the chairman and ranking minority member that this committee will step up to the task. Thank you.
Senator Sanders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Simpson and Mr. Bowles, for being with us. 5 minutes is not a whole lot of time, so I just want to make a few points and then maybe ask a few questions. I think one of the problems that we have when we just focus on deficit reduction, as significant an issue as it is, we lose the broad context of what's happening in this country, which is not just deficit reduction. The other reality that's happening in this country is that for many years the middle class has been collapsing. Poverty has been increasing. We now have by far the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country. So while the middle class shrinks and poverty increases, the wealthiest people for many years have become much wealthier. So that you now have a situation, if you can believe it, where the top 400 families in America own more wealth than half of the families in America, where you have the top 1% earning more income than the bottom 50%. So when you talk about moving toward deficit reduction, which we all appreciate is an important issue, the question is, well, on whom should that burden fall? Should we really, as our Republican friends have recently suggested, throw 200,000 children off of Head Start? Should we cut back on the Social Security Administration? Should we cut back on Pell Grants with middle-class families finding it harder and harder to be able to afford college? How do you deal with that? So, to my mind, the first question that I would ask, and I'm going to have to request very brief answers because I want to get to Social Security, I want to get to health care as well. At a time when we have such a grotesquely unequal distribution of income and wealth, where over a recent 25-year period, 80% of all income in this country went to the top 1%, why in your proposal did you suggest that 3/4 of the movement toward deficit reduction come from spending cuts, only 25% from revenue? Why didn't you ask the wealthiest people in this country to start paying, and I know you did some of it, but in a much more significant way, their fair share of taxes?
First of all, I think we have a significant spending problem in this country. Secondly, I think we did exactly what you said. In every single case, we tried to protect the truly disadvantaged. If you look at all of our cuts that are in the other mandatory category, which is about 20% of the other mandatory category, we didn't touch a single one of those.
I would respectfully disagree with that.
It is a fact we didn't touch food stamps, we didn't
But
touch
for
unemployment, we didn't touch SSI, we left them all like that.
Okay.
If you look at
But
Social
answer my
Security, we
question.
gave
Answer my question. If you are earning,
I am answering your question, I will continue to.
but we don't have a lot of time.
Well,
Top 400 people in this
We'll take
country.
some more time.
That's because the tax expenditures actually go to those people. Those are the people who benefit from this. The top 400 people pay an average tax of about 16%.
That's correct.
Why do they do that? Because they have all these tax expenditures. We got rid of the tax expenditures. That's why the rate of increase in taxes for the top 1% or the top 1/10 of 1% is about 155 times what it is for somebody at the bottom.
Yeah, but
That's the right thing to do.
Yeah, but Mr. Chairman, at the end of the day, in your movement toward deficit reduction, 3/4 of your plan talks about cutting spending. And I just ticked off. How do you feel about throwing 200,000 kids off of Head Start? That's a cut in spending. Good idea?
I don't think we recommended that, sir, so I don't...
I know, but this is the result. When you talk about cuts in spending, Pell Grants and so on. All right, let me go on. We don't have a whole lot of time, and I apologize.
What about your president offering to cut LIHEAP
Terrible
by
idea.
50%? I didn't do that.
And it was a terrible idea, no question about it. But let me go to Social Security. Social Security, to my mind, has been an enormously successful program for the last 75 years, taken a whole lot of elderly people out of poverty, people with disabilities, widows and orphans, paid out every nickel owed to every eligible American. Now, I found it interesting. You just made a point, which I think is right, Mr. Bowles. You said when we dealt with Social Security, we didn't do it from a deficit reduction perspective. We did it to try to strengthen Social Security. President Obama, during his campaign, also had an idea. His idea was to raise the taxable income level at $250,000. Remember that? People earning more than $250,000, that cap would be removed. I thought that was a pretty sensible idea. What do you think about it?
I'm on the record. I have said many times that I didn't think that people in my income bracket needed a tax cut.
I was part of a group of Dave Pryor and Jack Danforth that met years ago with Paul Simon and agreed to take that lid completely off. That's me.
Is that your view today?
You can do anything you want. I'm not.
No, I'm not what I can do, but is that your, do you recommend to the Congress
I
that
don't know. You're the guy.
Well, I agree with President Obama that at $250,000 or more, that cap be removed. Do you agree with that proposal from the President? Any comments? You guys just did a long report.
I've already said, you know, I didn't believe that the top 2% of taxpayers needed a tax cut.
I asked a fairly simple question.
Do
you agree with President Obama that above $250,000 we should remove the cap? Yes, no?
Should remove what cap?
Cap on taxable income for Social Securities.
Well, actually, the cap
right now it's at
$106,800. We actually did raise it.
I know you did. I know you did.
180.
But President went a lot further than you did. He
no,
said,
I believe what we recommended, we took it to 90%.
Right.
You know, which is what it originally was.
But you're not answering.
Which means when in 2020, instead of going to 168,000, it goes to 190.
The President said.
So you'll pay taxes on an additional 22%.
But the President said that we should start very shortly by removing the cap for people over 250. I'm not hearing your opinion on that.
No, I'm happy to give you my opinion. My opinion is what we recommended.
Okay, so you don't agree with the President?
I don't.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. In terms of health care.
I don't think you'd ever agree with us either, so it doesn't make much difference.
In terms of health care, at the end of the day, the United States spends almost twice as much per capita on health care as any other nation. We are the only nation in the industrialized world that allows private insurance companies to play a significant role in health care. Other countries have national health care programs without private insurance companies. Would you suggest that one way to lower the cost of health care is to eliminate?
Senator, in fairness to colleagues, you've now gone over,
You're right.
well over, so I think we got to end it there. In fairness to colleagues.
All right.
When there's a flow of a conversation, I've permitted both sides to go up to a minute over, but now we're 2 minutes, so honestly I don't think it's fair. Let me go to a point that Senator Johnson raised, because I think it is a critically important point, and we discussed this in the commission. If we just use the historical average for revenues, no time in the last 40 years would we have balanced the budget. Not one time. So I don't think that's going to work. If we look at the 5 times the budget's been in surplus, what has been the revenue? And there you can see every time we have actually balanced the budget, revenue has been nearly 20% of GDP. 1969, 19.7. 1998, 19.9. 1999, 19.8. 2000, 20.6. 2001, 19.5. And we have a different circumstance we're dealing with, and the different circumstance we're dealing with is the baby boom generation, which is going to double the number of people that are eligible for these programs. So when we looked at that, and we're at 25% of GDP on spending now, we decided, and I wish Senator Sanders was still here, that we had to do more on the spending cut side of the ledger, substantially more, but that we also had to do something on the revenue side if we were going to bail this cat in some kind of fair way. Because we are borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. If we did that all on the spending side, we'd have to cut every single thing The federal government spends 40% across the board. Social Security, 40%. Medicare, 40%. Defense, 40%. I don't think that's reasonable. There has to be some revenue in this equation. Now, some will say, well, revenue is going to return to the norm. Right now, revenue is about 15% of GDP. The lowest it's been in 60 years. In fact, very close to being the lowest it's been in 80 years. Now, as the economy recovers, we will get back to close to the average because, you know, we know that in economics there's a return to the mean. We see it in the markets all the time, a return to the mean. We can expect that here too. But the reality is a return to the mean isn't going to balance this budget. It's not going to balance this budget. And so we concluded we got to have some revenue, although much more of it has to be done on the spending side of the equation. I want to just end my questioning without a question, to again say thank you. I know that, Al, you could have been out there with Ann in Wyoming, and for those that don't know, Alan married up. His wife is spectacular, and of course she's tough on him too. You know, she doesn't cut him a wide swath. And you know, you took on a tough assignment, and we appreciate it. And Erskine, I tell you, there are very few people I've got more confidence in to deal with something like this than I have confidence in you. And boy, you proved it in spades, the two of you working together on this commission, because I think the result, look, there are all kinds of things in here I dislike intensely. If I were going to do this, I'd do this very differently. You know, Dick Durbin called me the night before the vote. He said, Kent, what are you going to do? I said, I'm voting yes. He said, well, why? I said, the only thing worse than being for this is being against it. Because, look, the country is in deep, deep trouble. I don't know what could be more clear. This thing is headed for the cliff. And we say, well, we don't know when we're going to hit the cliff. That's true. There is not a single person that can honestly tell you they know with certainty when we're going to hit the cliff. The one thing we know for sure is we are hurtling towards it. That's one thing we know with certainty. So, you know, I'd say to colleagues, please, whatever your ideology, whatever your philosophy, I tell you, I put mine on the back burner because I deeply believe we got to do something like this. And the only plan out there I see that's got bipartisan support is this one. As much as I dislike it, and I do dislike it, I would do this very differently. But hey, what matters to the country is getting a result, because failure is not an option. Senator Sessions.
Thank you. We appreciate your work, and we'll continue to pursue bringing this government to fiscal sanity. I have no doubt that we need to start cutting this year. I don't think $61 billion out of $3,700 billion is going to put us in an economic slowdown. I know politically the administration is opposing any of those kind of cuts, but I think that they can be done and could be done wisely and will add up to over $800 billion if we were to execute it. So I'm saying let's get busy now. And I do not shut the door on entitlement reform because obviously they're unsustainable. They're on an actuarially unsound basis. And when you've got that, you just got to face up to it. And it goes without saying, I think the world financial markets and our own economy would respond if we put ourselves on a sound course rather than an unsound course. You have given us good suggestions. Many of them, I think, are within the realm of achievability. And let's see if we can make some progress, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to working with you, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. Thank all of the colleagues who participated here today, and special thanks to the witnesses. Thanks for your contribution. And, you know, you've done something very important. I hope the country's paying close attention. I especially hope my colleagues are.
Mr. Chairman, let me just say thank you for your consistency. You came here when I was here. You stuck right with your guns on the budget all the way through. I thank Mike Enzi and Senator Sessions. And if we can just remember one thing, we're Americans first, not Republicans or Democrats. And if we can't get out of that rut, we'll never get out of the rut.
Amen. Thank you both.